So today's webinar is broadly structured in 3 parts, as you can see from the presentation outline. In the introduction, I'll acknowledge our partners and provide a general overview of field testing. Thereafter, we'll go into the details of the field testing activity per appliance. We'll start with milking machines, then go on to refrigerators and finish with solar water pumps. And at the end of each appliance presentation, we shall pause and take 5 minutes to respond to any burning questions. We shall then conclude by sharing the next steps in relation to this research. Next slide, please. So this work was made possible through the collaboration of multiple partners, as you can see on the screen. The Efficiency for Access Coalition is co-managed by CLASP and the Energy Saving Trust. LEA is the flagship program under E4A, and it is funded by the FCDO and IKEA Foundation, as you can see on the left there. We also worked very closely with 2 implementing partners during this research, and I'm really pleased to report that they're joining us today to share from their experience as well. So EED Advisory were our primary technology partner, designing and deploying the instruments that we used to remotely monitor appliance performance in multiple geographies. And then SELCO Foundation partnered with us on the milking machine study and were extremely instrumental in the qualitative research design and social impact study. Next slide, please. So what is field testing and why does it matter? So you'll see there on the slide, we start with an explanation on lab testing, and I'll get into it just to contrast with field testing to make it clearer for our audience. E4A has really wide experience with lab testing appliances from our work with the Global LEAP Awards that some of you may be familiar with over the last few years. And lab testing essentially provides an in-depth understanding of appliance performance under ideal conditions, and it allows for benchmarking appliances, their performance against each other. However, minimal data exists on the usability and the performance of appliances in real-world environments, and field testing solves that problem. So it allows us to track the performance of appliances in the hands of users over a longer period of time. And this provides insights that consider user-centric variables, site-specific conditions, and these things may affect performance, durability, and customer satisfaction. So as you can see down there, we've previously published a number of field testing guides. One is appliance agnostic, one is for refrigerators, one is for solar water pumps. And we also published a report on the beta testing of remote monitors. And this was supposed to serve as a resource for the sector for any other people who would be interested in field testing their appliances. And so the evidence we generate through field testing enhances lab test methods, it improves product design, and it advances the overall appliance ecosystem. We'll now go into the first appliance we're discussing today, which is milking machines. Next slide, please. Thanks. Next slide. All right. So again, why did we decide to test milking machines in India specifically? So you'll see here that dairy farming is the single largest agricultural activity in India, and milking machines as a technology are still fairly nascent. So this allowed us to do 2 things: to test our own field testing manual, the appliance agnostic field testing manual, but to also test an appliance that we have not previously lab tested and understand how it performs in general to allow us to develop metrics in the event that we would start lab testing appliances like milking machines. And so using our own manual allows us to identify gaps and learn on how we can improve it. And field testing an appliance that does not have lab testing protocol allows us to think through the metrics that would go into lab testing. So the image that we see there on the left shows a single cluster milking machine. And what I mean by that is that it can only milk 1 cow at a time. And it does so in an alternating reciprocating pattern, similar to a 2-stroke engine. Think of like what you have on a motorcycle. So 2 teats are milked at a time by each stroke. And just for clarity, 1 cow has 4 teats. So that's what I mean by it can only milk 1 cow at a time. On the right-hand side, we see some machine specifications. The single cluster milking machine uses a 12-volt direct current motor. So this is solar powered. And it's powered at 120 watts. It weighs about 35 kilos in weight and is cleaned by pumping boiling water and an alkaline solution through it once you've completed your milking. I'll now hand over to Alois from EED Advisory to talk us through the remote monitoring design. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Martha. As part of the team that was responsible doing the research and development on how to design such a device that would be able to monitor a milking machine, we divided the research into two phases. The first phase is the qualitative phase, which essentially involved surveys that were deployed across India. And the second part was the quantitative part of the study that determines what specific portions or parts of a milking machine that we'd like to monitor. So the method that we used to monitor was using the Internet of Things technology and also custom-made devices to monitor each milking machine. The specific parameters we chose included voltage, current utilized by the milking machine, the geographical location of the milking machine itself. And in addition to this, each milking machine sent data online to a custom server that was dedicated specifically to this project. On the right, you see the design that was actually used, that was installed on the milking machine. At the bottom of the picture, you can see where the cable inputs come in from the solar panel. And on the left, you have the cables that go directly to the machine. So the method that we used was an invasive method. By invasive, I mean that we put the device in between the power source and the milking machine, and this enabled us to monitor the device across several months. In addition to this, certain factors do also need to be considered, which include having water protection to prevent the device from being spilled with milk during milking. And at this phase, I would like also to hand back to Martha, who will also touch back on the other parts of the study. Next slide.
Thanks, Alois. I'll pass it over to Anil from SELCO to take over the qualitative research design.
Hi, Anil. If you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Hello, everyone. Once again, thank you, class, for the partnership opportunity. Along with our field testing exercise, we have carried out the research study. The purpose was mainly to collect the milk yield data as well as to assess the benefits of milking machine on the dairy farm activity. These dairy farmers, our response districts and two are on the near to the capital city, but these are rural districts. The study was conducted between January and March 2022. Milking machines were deployed much earlier to it. So milking machines in 18 sites were deployed in 2000, much before 2019, and in the rest of the site in 2020 and 2021. Yeah.
Hi,
can you hear me?
Sorry to interrupt. Your sound is kind of cutting out. Maybe you can switch off your video and start your presentation again.
Okay. Am I sounding better now?
Yes, it's better.
Okay. So shall I start again? Okay, I'm starting again. So along with the field test assignment, we have carried out a qualitative research study in the 25 sites of in the dairy farm sites. The purpose was to validate the milking data and the benefits, to measure the benefits of milking machines on dairy farm activities. These dairy farmers were spread across 4 districts of Karnataka state. The study was conducted between January to March 2022. The intervention, the milking machine itself was deployed much earlier to it. In the 18 sites of these 18 sites we done a study, milking machine was deployed before 2019, and remaining sites were deployed in 2020 and 21. So hence we have adopted a retrospective pre and a post research design, where our questionnaire was structured in such a way to capture socio-demographic profile, the dairy farm practices, milk yield, income, and energy consumption, as well as the challenges faced by these dairy farmers. A separate questionnaire was administered for drudgeries to measure the drudgery scale on the milker. To minimize the recall bias, we have structured questionnaires in a very in a manner where we have reduced the recall bias. Due to smaller sample size, the intervention deployment was, and the gap in the intervention deployment itself, so we may not be able to extrapolate the results and their interpretations on larger dairy farm sector. Shall we move to the next slide? Sorry, it's okay. The dairy farmers, the brief profile of these dairy farmers, I would like to run you through. Most of them are, based on livelihood, for their livelihood activities. They're based on agriculture and the dairy farming activities. They're some form of vulnerable aspects also they were experiencing. They were remotely settled and in forest areas. And more than 52% of the households were in hilly areas and plains, and 50% of the end users were females. Talking about the herd size, the milking machines which SELCO Foundation has provided through Shira Enterprise was compatible with the exotic crossbreeds. So all the 25 end users were having exotic and crossbreed cows. The 7 of them were having indigenous as well as buffaloes in their herd. Shall we move to the next slide, please? So these dairy farmers have inherited these farms from their family and had almost 10 years of experiences. The hand milking is the most common method of smallhold farmers in this region, especially if you see in India for that matter. So the drudgery is one thing is associated with the milking activity largely. So feeling of exhaustion, pain due to the posture, and the time for milking the cows itself, and the milk wastage during the milking, the poor visibility during at the cow shed, especially when they milk the cows in early in the mornings, where the common problems they have faced, faced during the milking. So I would request Martha to present the findings on the research study. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anil and Alois, for talking through the research design. So next slide, please. We'll share some insights that we kind of observed during and after the conducting of this study. The first one is reduced milking time. So the introduction of the solar-powered milking machine reduced the average time for milking by 4 minutes. So previously, before the introduction of the machine, it used to take about 9 minutes to milk. And then after the machine, we saw that the average time for the N is equals 25, the 25 farmers we tested, it went down to about 5 minutes. So we see a reduction in milking time there. Also, it led to the reduced overall time for dairy-related activities. And what that meant was the farmers reported spending a lot less time on dairy farm activities. So this means cleaning the shed or milking the cows is just one step, but there's feeding them, cleaning the shed, etc. And this was actually a remarkable difference because we saw the time reduction was reported as going from 56 minutes per session or per milking event, let's say, to 30 minutes after the intervention. So it went down by almost half, as you can see there. And then in terms of drudgery, and here we think of drudgery as the difficulty in conducting the task, the exhaustion that is associated with the task, posture issues, etc. Across all the parameters where the questions were asked in relation to drudgery, the score was above 70%, and it was a 0 to 100%, of course, scale. And so this indicated that the use of the machine provided relief to the dairy farmers who previously practiced mostly manual milking. And then in terms of health, we also observed an improvement in health indicators. And so survey respondents reported that they had a reduction in issues such as wrist pain, back pain, shoulder pain. And so this meant that the introduction of the machine helped them to stay healthier and be less sore over time. And then finally, there was an improvement in reliability. And this was an interesting observation. So the solar-powered milking machine comes with a battery, and this battery then offered an alternative power source, even for those farmers who were previously on grid, right? To milk in the event that there was a grid outage, because it continued to provide lighting, right? And power the milking machine itself. And so what we saw was that it offered an alternative, reliable power source for dairy farmers, and this allowed them to continue milking even during power outages. Next slide, please. And then lastly, on milking machines, and this is the part where we'd like to get a little bit into the what did not work portion of this activity, because it wouldn't really be field research if everything went perfectly. The whole idea behind field research is that we improvise as we go. And so you'll see there, the graph is just an indication of some of the outputs that we were getting out of our remote monitors. And you'll see there, just as an illustration, we can see 2 milking events illustrated by those peaks that you're looking at on your screen. And those peaks show us that the milking machine was actually being used and current was being drawn. So at the very least, we could be able to corroborate the reports that we got in the surveys from the farmers who said that they were indeed using the milking machines. You'll see here, this is an example of a farmer who had 3 lactating cows, and their daily yield was about 48 liters. So the first thing that we see here is that while we were beta testing the remote monitors, we didn't have a clear distinction or sensitivity analysis around the different states of the milking machine. What I mean by this is it was not clear, as you can see from the image, while no pumping was happening, but maybe cleaning was happening, because to clean, you have to pump water through the machine. So it's also a current draw. We could not distinguish that. And then additionally, we could not distinguish the changeover between milking one cow and the next. And so you'll see there that one of the things that can be improved essentially is improving the sensitivity while you're beta testing your remote monitors. The second thing is remote data transmission failure. As we mentioned, the remote monitors were designed in Kenya, and they were deployed in India. And we were relying on a global bulk SMS provider who has a fairly strong presence in India. However, we noticed that the communications failed. And those failures could be prevented by potentially using multiple SMS providers to provide redundancy. And additionally, we could beta test in future in the exact geography where we intended to conduct the field test. So actually check that we are receiving transmissions from India. I see Anil mentioning that I'm not audible. Can the rest of you still hear me?
Hi, Martha. Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'll keep going. I think it might be a connection issue on Anil's side. And then the third thing is to improve the granularity of yield data. So because we are working with a product that is used for human consumption, we faced a challenge in finding sensors or monitors that would be acceptable for food grade. And so essentially we didn't have a food grade flow meter to measure the yield, the milk output on the other end of the milking machine. And so we relied on self-reporting and SMSs. What, however, that meant is, as you can see, we got daily yield reported for the full day. We couldn't distinguish between the 2 milking events, how much milk was during the morning and how much was in the evening. And less so, we could not distinguish between each cow. So that could also be improved, right, by generating multiple data points. So distinguish between milking events. And if any of you has a solution for us for food grade flow meters, we'd be very happy to hear about them. And then in terms of the frequency of data verification, during the monitoring phase of this exercise, it took 6 months and we monitored quarterly. Now, one of the things we learned was, had we introduced more frequent checks on the data quality we were receiving, we could have potentially arrested the data transmission loopholes and reduced that to maybe a monthly frequency so that we can adjust and improvise a little sooner in the process rather than later. And so this is one of the things that we recommend to be done more frequently. As you're collecting data in the field, improve your verification, increase the frequency, and check the veracity of the data data you're getting. And then lastly, and this is specific for milking machines, to be able to isolate external factors that may affect the machine performance. So from an appliance performance perspective, we would need to standardize potentially the breed of the cow, understand the lactation stage and feeding inputs of the cow, and understand the impact of those on milk output so that we can standardize that and just check the performance of the equipment alone, because that then will allow us in future to develop a metric for performance and efficiency in terms of watt hours per liter, how much energy is used to put out a liter of milk. And that would be super helpful in comparing different kinds of milking machines. So in this case, we have the same kind of milking machine across the different farmers. And so we did not necessarily need to standardize this. But if you're thinking about scaling this process or doing it comparing different kinds of milking machines, then we recommend that you isolate external factors that may affect the appliance performance. I'm going to stop there and hand over to the communications team to moderate the Q&A. Thank you very much for listening to us. We look forward to seeing what questions you have.
Great. Thank you, Martha, Anil, and Alois for taking us through that first appliance segment. Martha, I see there are some questions that were dropped in the chat in the Q&A, and the first one is, how is drudgery reduction being quantified?
Great, thanks, Lisa. I actually have Anil on the call, and so seeing as they did the qualitative research design, I'll have him address the question, and then if there are any gaps, I'll take over after that. Anil, go ahead. Or Anil, you're on mute in case you're speaking. No? Okay. So seeing as Anil is not there, I'll try and provide the response in terms of how the how the drudgery scale was developed. And so we had a questionnaire, and within the, oh, Anil, I see you're back. Would you like to take the question? No? Okay. Sorry for the mix-up. So I'll go ahead and respond to the drudgery question. We had 5 indicators, or was it 4? We had 4 indicators and 1 total that sums up these 4 indicators on a scale of 0 to 100. And the questions that were asked prior to the milking machines being introduced were, how difficult was milking before in terms of the process of milking using manual milking? How much pain were you experiencing due to the posture you assumed while manually milking? How exhausted did you feel after milking the cows? And how physically demanding did you find the work of milking? And so we measured that at the beginning with the survey pre the machines, and then we measured that at the end again with the same respondents to see how that has evolved since the introduction of the machine. And then we summed up those findings on the questionnaire, and we put them over 100. So we evaluated them against a percentage scale and evaluated them over 100, and 74% essentially reported a decrease in drudgery across all the indicators. So that's how we measured for drudgery. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Martha. We can move on to the second one. Is it possible to bring this about in more indigenous breeds? It will promote the dairy farmers to adopt them.
Yes, I'm not sure whether Anil mentioned this, but just for context, this milking machine actually could only be used for, I think, exotic breeds and crossbreeds as well. So there might be milking machines in terms of technology that are available for milking indigenous breeds. It just so happened that these ones that we field tested specifically from Keishira are only used on exotic breeds and hybrids. So I do think it is possible to bring this about in more indigenous breeds. I just do not have a brand name specifically or a milking machine example to provide because we did not test for those.
Great. We can go to the third question. Could you share more regarding the potential size of the market and affordability for the milking machine? What was the dollar equivalent cost and average payback time?
So while we were conducting the study, actually, when we were doing the qualitative survey, I don't quite remember seeing this question, but the milking machines were distributed through the SELCO Foundation. And so I imagine Anil might have this information with him. Anil, if you're having difficulty unmuting yourself, potentially you could respond in the chat on the Q&A, just on the question of affordability and potential payback time for the farmers. If you can unmute, it would be great, but if you can't, kindly respond in the chat.
As we wait to see if Anil will send an answer in the chat box, there's another question that was asked and it was answered. The question was, how many sites were researched? I didn't get that in your presentation. And Mike, one of our other panelists, responded 25 dairy farmers across the Karnataka state. Please keep sending through your questions. We're very happy to answer them as we go through the presentation. I can see another question has come in. Is there any study that happened with the cows on the effect of the milking machine on the cows?
No, not within this field testing scope. We didn't research the cows, only the users of the equipment and the equipment itself.
For this other question, I'm not quite clear on what it says, but I'll try to read it out. Milk FOW meters are available in the market. I think the person meant few milking machines are available in the market. Is it because of the compatibility with the K-Share machines?
I'm not sure. My understanding of that question was actually that it could be milk flow meters. So, we mentioned that during the yield data collection, we didn't find a food grade flow meter. And so, Alois, if you can be able to unmute, we could potentially learn a little bit about more about these flow meters that are available in the market and how, compatible they are with the equipment that we're using or not.
Yes, sure. Part of the criteria in terms of determining the exact flow meter was, as has been said, food safety. So we did find one flow meter that was food grade, but due to the time by which this study was held, which was during COVID, businesses were not running as usual. So they could not deliver to us as was. So they had closed down the factory. So I would say it was largely a matter of supply and also the rarity of such flow meters.
Yeah, maybe just to add on to what Aloysia said, yes, we did have an issue with the supply chain during COVID as we were beta testing these monitors during COVID. But also, as Aloysia mentioned, we were aiming for a remote monitor that could be able to send data, remotely, to preferably using GSM. But unfortunately, the only options that we could get were extremely expensive. I think a meter was costing more than $1,000. For 1 meter, and also that was a big factor for us when we were considering the type of flow meter to use. Yeah.
Great. We can go on to answer 2 more questions, and then we'll need to transition to the next appliance. So the next question is, please provide more details on the solar sizing for this solution and the high-level design.
Yeah, I was actually just typing an answer for that. I'll answer it out loud so that it makes sense. I'll provide an answer next to that question in typing. Let me just get it from the report directly so that then it's clear for everyone. Can be referenced later.
Okay, that's fine. We can move on to the next one. A general question: what is the experience with the applicability of field testing across different field settings? In this case, can 25 farmers in one Indian state give results that are valid across the country or other countries?
Oh, that's a great question. So the simple answer is no. 25 farmers in a country that large does not necessarily provide an indication of how the milking machine would operate in different geographies or even in different countries, right? But for milking machines in specific, as I mentioned earlier, as it's a nascent technology, we started by kind of testing it out in a smaller region, in a smaller area, deliberately so we could just learn how the technology itself works and how people interact with it. You will see, as my colleagues present on refrigerators and solar solar water pumps, that those were tested across different countries and with different models, just so we can get a slightly broader view of the applicability of those appliances across different field settings, because they're a little bit more mature. And so that's a great question. Yeah.
Thanks, Martha and team, for answering those questions. I know there are a few more that are left, but we'll come back to those at the end of the presentation. At this point, I would like us to transition to the second appliance. And we have our colleague Leah Bensi Thomas from Energy Saving Trust, who's going to be taking us through the presentation.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everyone. As Lisa mentioned, I am Leah Thomas from Energy Saving Trust. I am presenting on behalf of Yakub Barba, who is currently on field visit in Uganda. So please forgive me if I don't have an in-depth knowledge on the subject. But if you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and I'm sure someone from the team will be able to respond. So here I'll be presenting the results from the field test of solar-powered refrigerators in India and Rwanda. A total of 42 refrigerator owners participated in this study, 22 in Rwanda and 20 in India. These two countries were selected to compare the refrigerator performance in diverse geographies and diverse climatic conditions. And these refrigerators were manufactured by different companies, and the users varied in socioeconomic background, gender, age, education, etc. In India, both large and small types of refrigerators were deployed, whereas in Rwanda, it was only the large refrigerator type, which was suitable to be used in small shops to generate income. And we had 4 research objectives going into this study. First was to measure the refrigerator's performance in a real-world environment. There is very limited field data collected till date on standalone solar-powered refrigerators. So though we do laboratory testing as part of Leia through Verisol, but that's in a controlled environment. So collecting this data was crucial to understand how refrigerators perform when they are used in real-world conditions. Second was to understand the interaction between end users and refrigerators and its associated impact. So we aim to evaluate if the user training we provided is sufficient and learn ways to close potential gaps. And the study has also been helpful in summarizing the key recommendations based on lessons learned from this project. And a very important objective for this research was to improve the laboratory testing conditions to better reflect the field realities as much as possible. To talk about the research design, Lisa, next slide. I'll hand over to Alois from EED, who managed the survey and performance data collection. Alois, after you.
As part of the research team that was implementing the research design for this and also implementing the same, we broke the solution into basically 3 parts. The first part is a beta testing that we carried out in Kenya for around 3 to 4 months. And the second part was the qualitative study design that essentially had surveys that we deployed across the countries surveyed. And finally, we have the quantitative data. As part of the qualitative data, the main aspect that we were looking at was the usage scenarios and also service delivery. With regards to the quantitative data, we mostly look at the energy required for the fridge or the appliance to provide a certain level of service. And therefore, to be able to measure the fridge in terms of the energy that it takes in order to provide service, we measure on the quantitative side certain power parameters, which include voltage, current, power. Also of interest is also trying to also know where exactly this fridge is across all the countries, and also the factors with regards to the fridge temperature that it needs to maintain. So one key aspect that I believe that is important to highlight is that the device that you see on the left essentially has a small battery within it that allows it to still be powered and monitoring what is the fridge temperature, even when the fridge is switched off. So that means that the device can be powered down, but it'll still run off its own battery. So why is this important? So monitoring while there is no power is important in order to determine the pull down time, which is essentially defined as when a person switches on the fridge, what is the amount of time that it takes to start from that starting temperature till a given end temperature, which is typically 8 or 4 degrees. And then the second parameter by which it is important in order to have a battery on the device is in order to monitor autonomy. How long can the fridge stay without power while still being able to maintain its temperature? So use this in order to determine how long the fridge could go in the event of a blackout or in the absence of power. So at this point, I will hand the presentation back to Leah, who will present on the next slide.
Thank you, Alois. As mentioned in the previous slide, to ensure robustness of the results, diverse groups of users were identified for the study, especially in terms of gender, education, income, and access to grid. Most of these refrigerators were used for income generation, particularly in small shops to sell milk, butter, cold drinks, vegetables, fruits, as well as fish. And users were generally satisfied with the product, with relatively higher satisfaction in Rwanda. That's because some users in India reported issues with inadequate after-sales service. Interestingly, the user interaction with refrigerators affected the performance results more than we anticipated. Many users regularly turned off their refrigerators overnight. The reason for this behavior is unknown, but it may be linked to the perception of saving energy when the refrigerator is not actively used overnight. Despite the refrigerators being powered by standalone solar, so there was no savings on electricity bills, but people did turn off their refrigerators overnight. In the next slide, we can see how this user behavior impacted the refrigerator performance. Lisa. So this is an example from Rwanda. Based on the data we collected, we grouped the refrigerators into 2 categories. On the left column, you can see Group A with 8 refrigerators that were operated continuously. And on the right column, you can see Group C with 7 refrigerators that were switched off overnight. And the results are averaged across each group. So in the top left column, you can see that where the refrigerators are operating without any interruption, the average power consumption is broadly aligned with the ambient temperature as we had expected. Whereas on the right column, you can see how refrigerators performed when they were manually turned off overnight. Here you can see that the power consumption and ambient temperature are not aligned. And this is due to the steep power consumption increase at 6 a.m. when they were turned on, and a decrease in the evening around 6 p.m. when they were turned off. On the bottom left, you can see that when the refrigerators were continually operating, the internal compartment temperature is consistent over the course of 24 hours at around 0 degrees Celsius. And the power consumption is increasing when the ambient temperature is increasing. But on the right bottom column, you can see that the internal temperature is inconsistent, which could result in shorter shelf life and spoil the product stored inside. So you can see that there is a higher power consumption, especially between 10 and 2 p.m. So this type of use could result in shortening the life of batteries. So these standalone solar powered refrigerators are designed to be used continuously without any user interruption. So it is key to provide appropriate training to end users to understand that the refrigerators perform better without them being turned off overnight and without any electricity bills because they're not connected to the grid. In the next slides, we will look at the lessons that we learned from this project. So our empirical observations from the study suggest that the magnetic dose sensors have higher rate of mechanical failure for long-range measurements. So in such cases, accelerometer-based measurements method should be preferred. Another point was with regard to the remote data transmission failure. So we experienced difficulties with sending data remotely from the measurement device in most of the refrigerators, except sites where the measurement device was installed on the wall. So this was because the fridge's metallic body distorted the data transmitted remotely via radio frequency. So if future studies, then we would prefer the use of SD cards, especially if we are using large metallic objects and need the data to be transmitted remotely. Then, like Martha had mentioned, we had issues with mobile network incompatibility. Since the team couldn't travel to India because of COVID, the plan was to manage the project by setting up all measurement devices in Kenya and using a Kenyan SIM card to connect to the Indian mobile network. So though this was assured by the network providers that it is compatible to the Indian mobile providers, but this system failed. So a key takeaway was not all networks are compatible, and implementing parties should accommodate testing within timelines. And if there are multiple project partners involved in a study, it is always beneficial to use a uniform survey tool, so to avoid any quality management issues. And with regard to SD cards, so though we used industrial standard SD cards, which are of superior quality and have higher protection from solar radiation or power loss and dust, a small portion of SD cards did fail due to power failures and prolonged periods without fridge use in Rwanda. Recommendations, Lisa, to the next slides. Thank you. So the sample for the study was relatively small to draw robust conclusions, so we need further field testing. Robust testing requires a closer monitoring of various inputs, such as the type, quantity, and temperature of stored products when they're placed into the refrigerators. And this would require real-time monitoring rather than gathering data through surveys. Further standardization is required to compare refrigerator performance on a like-for-like basis, because we had multiple manufacturers. This was something we would do in future studies. From the survey data, we gathered that a mix of qualitative and quantitative questions, which includes open-ended questions, are quite valuable. They provide interesting insights to user behavior and its impact on appliance performance. And a major learning was around improving the user training and after-sales service to increase the uptake and retain users. These refrigerators are relatively expensive and often used for income generation. So improving these aspects can help with repayment rates and have a higher impact on the ground. That's it. Thank you. I'll hand over to Lisa.
Thank you, Leah. I will check the Q&A and we can go through some of the questions that have been sent through. The first one is, are these standard off-the-shelf refrigerators not lined with PCM?
Is it Alois or Mike who's better to answer this question?
Yes, I'll
Potentially, Mike.
No, Alois, go ahead, please.
So I did not understand the abbreviation of PCM. So if it's possible,
it's phase change material. Yeah, maybe I can just answer that. Yes. So the fridges that we had were both DC appliances, and they were mostly direct dry fridges. We did not have any phase change material in the fridges that we monitored. So yes, and this can be found in any shop. Yeah.
All right. The next question.
We do not have any battery enabled battery powered fridge.
Thanks, Mike. The next question is, could you also share affordability findings? What was the cost, payback time, and user response to costs?
So we could respond to that offline, just taking it off the report and sending it over just as been done with the milking machine.
That sounds good. Related to the first question, I've seen Steve Makani has sent another one. Were all battery operated fridges? Could the finding turned off at night be because the battery was used for other purposes, e.g. lights?
That's a good question. So with regards to the usage of the fridge, so essentially how the design of the device was is that you cannot use the device battery for any other purpose downstream towards the fridge. So, and also in addition to that, the power supply that was used on the fridge was mainly used by the fridge. So according to our measurements, we did not detect any minimal usage from the battery, but we already designed for this within the beta testing, ensuring that the battery was only used by the device that was performing the measurement.
Yep, thanks, Alois. And just to reiterate on that, yes, we had batteries for the remote monitoring unit, as Alois mentioned, to allow for monitoring even after the sun has gone down. But the the fridges that we were monitoring were not battery enabled, or they were not powered by a battery. They were all direct drive fridges.
Mike, this is related to what you've answered and what you had answered previously, but someone is asking, for the refrigerators, are they purely DC or can they be powered both by AC and DC power? Do we have refrigerators that use PCM for storage instead of battery, like the case of solar vaccine refrigerators?
Yeah, in this field testing, as Alois and Leah mentioned, we only monitored 3 models of fridges, or 3 brands of fridges, and they did not have phase change materials. They were only direct drive, powered only by the panel, and yeah. So ideally, no. And on the question of the DC, they were actually all of them were DC fridges, and also this was something that we, in partnership with the companies that participated, we ensure that we're only monitoring the DC fridges because, well, these were the majority, and also just for uniformity of the recording instruments that we had, the remote monitoring units.
Mike, there are quite a few questions on batteries. There's another one that has come in. Can you confirm that these fridges did use external electrical batteries, not internal ICE batteries, using phase change material?
So, okay. So direct drive, so a phase change material means that it's using an ice pack, right? And the fridges that we were monitoring were not using these ice packs. They were only powered by the panel directly. And no, we did not have external batteries.
Great. I think that answers another one that had come in about direct drive, meaning using PCM or ICE batteries, so we can skip that. There was a previous one that asked, is there any backup system available with these refrigerators?
Sorry, I'm trying to find that question. You're asking if there are any backups for the batteries, for the fridges?
Yes.
No, they did not have backup power sources.
Okay, there was another earlier question. Could you please share the fridge volume and solar panel array sizes?
Yeah, I think that can be shared later on directly from the report.
Okay, we can do 2 more questions and then we'll need to go to the third appliance. The next question is, why did the magnetic door sensors fail?
Yes, I can take that question. So the reason why the magnetic door sensors failed was because we attached them to the door. So since the fridge was opened on top, we attached them to the sides, right? And we used adhesive tips since we were not allowed to perform any drilling or any other form of installation on the fridge. So what happened is that the actual tape or sort of adhesive wore off after some time due to wear and tear. Now, the alternative that we do suggest instead is to use accelerometer-based methods combined with also possible magnets, since we notice that majority of the fridge are magnetic. So this enables, first of all, to be able to monitor what is the inclination of the fridge door. Now, with the methods we used before, once the fridge came within a certain distance, the switch that went to the device was either open or closed. But in the event, maybe due to wear and tear, that the fridge was maybe closed at this height, it would not detect correctly. So it's much easier to detect what's the inclination of the fridge as opposed to what's the distance between both sides of the door.
Thanks, Alois. We can take one last question. Does it use a controller which converts input direct current from solar to one-phase AC?
Alois, would you like to take this one?
Yes, so if I got it correctly, I sense that that question was asking about DC to AC conversion. In case if it's not, just correct it over the chat. So the fridge was essentially direct driven. So that means that we're only talking about DC fridges directly that went now towards the compressor side. So in terms of monitoring the fridge, we only monitored on the DC side, and that's essentially what we confined ourselves to. So I hope that gives clarity on that specific question.
Thanks, Alois, Mike, and Leah for answering those questions, and Leah for taking us through the presentation. There's still quite a few questions on refrigerators, especially on the batteries, which we'll come back to at the end of the presentation. For now, I'd like to invite Mike Miner, who's going to be taking us through the third appliance, which is solar water pumps.
Thank you, Lisa. I will be taking you through solar water pumps. We've saved the best for last year. And we managed to monitor about 90 solar water pumps across 3 countries. We had 2 pump brands in Kenya and 1 in Senegal and 1 in Tanzania. In Kenya, we had a battery-enabled solar water pump that we were monitoring, but also we had a surface direct drive portable pump. And why we wanted to monitor solar water pumps, and I think maybe for the 3 appliances that we are talking about today, is because, well, these are productive use appliances that are kind of gaining traction, and we wanted to understand how they perform in real-world environments, just comparing this with lab performance. And for the solar water pumps, we wanted to understand who are these users of these pumps, what are the use cases that these pumps are used for, understanding the social demographic information about these end users. We also wanted to compare lab performance and field performance, just as Martha mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, that lab performance provides you with, well, quite some in-depth analysis of how an appliance performs in like ideal conditions. But as we know, pumps are and these other appliances are installed in very varied environments, and we wanted to understand how these pumps were performing in real world environments. We also wanted to understand how we could use insights from this field testing to inform our current lab testing methodology. As you may know, the Efficiency for Access and the Verasol program, we do a lot of lab testing of appliances, and we wanted to understand how this data would be useful, or at least helping. Sorry,
your sound was breaking. Perhaps you can turn off your video. Also, it might just be my connection, but just to make sure.
All right. I hope you can hear me okay. So anyway, just moving on to the next slide, I'm going to ask Alois to take us through the methodology as he has been for the other appliances. Yep, thanks.
Thank you, Mike. So within this specific study with regards to solar water pump research, we divided the study into 3 phases. The beta test that has been mentioned before, that essentially whereby we tested all appliances within a 3 to 4 month period. And secondly, we performed a qualitative study in terms of after the beta test was complete, we decided that we would specifically measure scenarios and service delivery through surveys, which is through the qualitative data. And finally, on the quantitative data, we would actually do this through devices that would be installed on the power input and on the piping from the pumps. So within this, while we're doing this, we also did notice that there tends to be generally 2 types of pumps that we need to account for, which we define as low power pumps and high power pumps. So what's the difference between low power and high power pumps? So a high power pump can typically have an input voltage between 100 and 1,000 volts, while a low power pump typically has voltage between 9 and 60 volts. So that's a classification that we use for the pumps within this. So both pumps require different designs for devices that are required for measurement within the study. And we essentially did 2 types of designs. For the high power pump, we mostly had them within Tanzania and Senegal. And for the low power pumps, we have them within Kenya. I will now hand over back to my colleague, Mike, to continue with the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Alois. And as I mentioned earlier, we collected both end user insights, and also we had the technical performance data collected by the remote monitoring units. And to understand who we were monitoring, or the respondents of these pumps, we wanted to understand their, what they use their pumps for, how much money they're making, what crops are grown, or what use cases these pumps are being used for. And as would be expected, the main occupation for most of the respondents was farming. But we did see in some instances, some of the respondents mentioning that they were not relying on the pump as their main source of income, or the activity they use the pump for as a main source of income. But they had businesses, some were employed in formal employments, and others as wage laborers. And the crops grown across these different countries, as you would expect, they're different. In Kenya, for instance, maize was the most dominant crop, just given the fact that maize is a staple crop in Kenya. In Tanzania, we had, tomatoes as the main crop grown there. But in Senegal, most of the users there were growing onions. Why? We are yet to investigate further. But as you can see, there were like a huge diversity of the crops that were being grown. Some were being grown for for sale, but others were being grown for own consumption. And in terms of income generation, in Kenya, we only had about 65% of the end users, the pump users, using their pump for income generation. Kenya, we actually had a huge diversity in terms of what the pump was being used for, whether it's for subsistence consumption or for other non-commercial activities. In Tanzania, we had about 73% of these respondents, but in Senegal, all of them were were being used for income generation. And we did see this correlated to how much money they were making at the end of the day, or at each. This question was asked on how much money they were making each month. And in Senegal, most of the respondents would actually earn more than $600. And in Kenya, where we had most of the diversity, we had the majority of the respondents falling between the $100 and $200 bracket, just because, obviously, because of that diversity and some of the pumps being used for subsistence farming. Next slide, please. We also wanted to understand water storage, water resource, the water source, as well as the water storage practices. And we noticed that Senegal had the least number of respondents who stored their water. And at least in Tanzania, we had a majority of the respondents storing their water. And also, just to mention that in Tanzania, most of the respondents sourced their water from boreholes, while in Kenya we had shallow wells and we had surface sources like rivers and water ponds. In Senegal, they were mostly pumping from wells. And in terms of this, what this water storage meant to, or at least affected the end user, was that we did see this correlation where like most of the respondents who said, actually 71% of the respondents who mentioned that of all the respondents who mentioned that they were not storing water, more than 70% say that their water source was insufficient. So obviously we did see, like, it's very much, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, because the fact that you're pumping from a diurnal pump, you can only pump during the day. It only makes sense that you either have a storage in form of a battery or in form of water. You can store the energy as water. So we also asked these respondents how their pump was performing, how reliable it was, and the good thing is that actually that most respondents, almost 80%, indicated that their solar water pump was meeting their needs. However, for this 21% who said that their water pump wasn't meeting their needs, some of the reasons mentioned were that, well, I actually have a very huge farm size, and it's not meeting, my pump cannot even meet my needs in terms of just irrigation needs. Other factors that were mentioned were insufficient water from the source. Some cited that there was low pressure from the pump, and also pump breakdown was an issue that was cited across Kenya and Tanzania. We also asked about training and demonstration. As you may know, these are huge productive use. Appliances is a huge investment. Most of these pumps are installed by the distributors of the manufacturers themselves, but we also, and the fact that these were pay-as-you-go pumps, technically you would expect at least everyone was able to receive training on how to use the pump, how to service the pump, and even what to do to your panel, or maybe what to do when the pump breaks down. The other important insight I would like to highlight from the end user, from the surveys, was that, actually this wasn't recorded from the surveys, this was recorded by the remote monitoring units, was that the average start time for most of the respondents across the 3 countries was about 6 a.m. However, we did see for the battery-enabled pumps, we saw some people pumping up actually from 3 a.m. in the morning and some would actually even start at 2 a.m. For the battery-enabled pump, as well as the surface portable pump. For the 2 submersible pump types, we did see that this was it had very little human interaction, where the pump would automatically start at 6 a.m. when the sun comes out, and then it would stop pumping when the sun went down. And obviously this also raises an issue of just water sustainability, how you're using your water resource. So I will present in the next slide insights from the technical performance data, what we learned from the remote monitoring units, the data that we were collecting. And as Alois mentioned, we were monitoring voltage, current, and calculating power, but we were also calculating energy efficiency. And energy efficiency in this case was calculated as the wire-to-water efficiency, which you calculate by looking at the weight of the water moved over a vertical distance in a period of time, divided by how much energy is consumed is consumed by the pump. So, and from this we noted that most of the pumps are operating on average between 20 to 40% efficiency. But again, when you look closer at each, at individual sites, we noted that even between, or when you're comparing pumps within the same pump model, even within the same geographic location, there were very, very huge variations in terms of how these pumps are performing. And what we concluded was that the performance or the efficiency of a pump is very, or is tied to the site-specific conditions of that pump. So how the pump was installed. Was it installed to the recommended depth, or is it pumping within the recommended, the recommended head? Are they using the right materials in terms of like the peripherals, like pipes? Are they using the right batteries? Are they servicing their pump, as recommended? And obviously, that's why we saw this huge variation. We also noted, just looking at the instantaneous power, instantaneous current, and voltage, we did see some spikes in some pumps in Tanzania. We did see these spikes. But trying to understand how these pumps were performing over time, in the chart on your right-hand side, we took a subset of 4 pumps. 4 pumps of the same model, and we wanted to understand how their efficiency was changing over time. And we did see some interesting trends here, where, like, for instance, if you look at site number 13 F6, you can see that the efficiency of the pump was averaging about 30% between July and September, but then it started going down. And also this is the same case you are looking at site 141D, where you can see the efficiency of the pump is averaging about 40%, but then it starts just going down in February of 2022. But also like looking at 140B and 13EA, we can see that the efficiency was low, or it was averaging quite very low, about 10%, less than 10%, but then suddenly you can see an increase. And these are some of the things that we were not able to understand why, and hence our recommendation to try and carry out more research to understand why this is happening, and even to understand what does this performance variability mean to an end user. Do they even understand that it's happening? Does it affect their yield? Does it affect the pump performance from their own perspective? So these are some of the things that we would like to explore in subsequent research. So in the next slide, I'm going to just compare lab and field performance. And generally, we noticed that field performance was obviously lower than in the lab recorded efficiency. For instance, like in this solar water pump model 3.1, we did see that there was some huge variations, even in terms of just the head that was recorded, or at least that was reported by the end user, that the pump was recommended, or at least in the lab, it was tested for about 50 meters, but it was installed at 80 meters, some at 66. But you can see that does not translate to reduced efficiency, for instance, in site number 4 for pump 3.1. So although this may actually mean that there was an error in the data, there is a lot of need to just understand how these pumps are installed. Are they following the manufacturer or the distributor recommended head, or at least the recommended parameters? In solar water pump 4.4, we did see that the average efficiency for the pumps recorded there was about 63%, but what we got was about 37.6%. And even in cases where the head was extremely low, the simulated head was about 80 meters, but we could see that some were actually installed at 13 meters depth. So that means that the pump is very, very capable. But when you look at what that translates, like in site 7, in terms of efficiency, it's extremely low. So from these learnings, we did come up with some lessons learned, and we are going to talk about them in the next slide, as well as some of the recommendations. In the next slide, yes, please. So we did learn that it's actually extremely difficult to monitor portable pumps because they keep moving. Today, they are pumping from this particular section of the river. Tomorrow, they're pumping from another. So this, it's very hard to track the head, especially when trying to understand the wire to water efficiency. So maybe if people have done this testing of portable pumps in the past and have some insights, we'd be very much happy to learn from you people. We also noted that that when you are carrying out field testing, there is almost always, when a pump breaks down, it's almost always easier to blame the remote monitoring equipment. And we did see this in some of the cases across the 3 countries where the pump is failing, not because of the remote monitoring unit, but because this was installed as an add-on later on. It's always easier to blame the new addition, but at least we did try to at least link the customers or the respondents with the manufacturer to at least try and address these issues. Also, we did see theft of this of our ultrasonic GSM meters, especially in areas where like the businesses for brass, which is a material that makes the meters, is actually like a blooming business. We recommend to also factor in flooding, because some of these pumps were actually installed on the ground because it's like, for instance, where you're trying to capture the flow of the the pump before there are any diversions, or trying to record the volume of the water pumped before there are any diversions from the pipe, then it probably is on the ground. And we did see that this was actually affected by flooding. Also, as mentioned, I think by my colleagues in the fridge section, that after sales service is actually very important. We did see some customers who maybe someone purchased a pump, they gave it to their mother, and they actually don't even understand how to follow up on the warranty and after sales services, who to contact in case the pump broke down. And I think that kind of direct customer relationship is very, very important, just to ensure that because this was really affecting their satisfaction, just trying to understand how is your pump performing. They'll say, actually, my pump broke down, it wasn't fixed, and that obviously affects their satisfaction at the end of the day. Some of the recommendations that we had, I think the main one was like adoption of water storage as a standard practice amongst solar water pump users. I think this may seem obvious to most people, but this is not always the case. Like especially where people don't have storage, and even for the direct drive pumps, like water storage is very, very critical. At least it helps in just making sure that you're only pumping what you need, because we did see that when your pump is an automatic pump, starts pumping during when the sun comes out, and it only goes off when the sun goes down, that means that you're actually over pumping. Sometimes when you're pumping more than you need, but at least a water storage can be able to address the issue of water sufficiency as well as water use. We also looked at, recommend that at least training and just that strict adherence to the installation guidelines. And this also, it's like a double-edged sword. Like manufacturers have to provide adequate information on how to install these pumps, but also the distributors, the installers, they need to follow these. They need to follow these installation guidelines to the letter. So also we did get some respondents saying or mentioning that they would really appreciate a battery-enabled pump, although this may be possible for some of the low power pumps, it may not be the case for the high power pumps, as Alois mentioned. And maybe exploring second life batteries from EVs would be another way of just trying to provide additional storage in terms of additional energy storage in terms of a battery, and obviously that flexibility that the battery-enabled pump users saw, maybe powering lights or powering other appliances in their house. Yes, and also lastly, we did see that during the monitoring phase, we did see that some of the respondents actually increased the farming size, or the size of the farm that they were irrigating. So you had actually purchased a pump that to irrigate maybe 2 acres, but then because you can see the business is good, you want to increase your acreage. So that obviously affects the capacity of the pump to at least irrigate your entire field. And obviously we saw that affecting their satisfaction as reported in the end user service. So I will stop there and answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Mike. There are some questions that came through as you were making your presentation. One came in very early in your presentation, and they're asking, what about Tanzania farmer earnings?
We do have this data in the report. We have that breakdown of what was recorded in terms of our monthly earnings by country. So please have a look at the report, and you can be able to pull out these statistics here.
Okay, then there's another question. Were all the pumps installed new or all user purchased, into brackets all pumps? Would the study have perhaps been better compared or monitored had the equipment all been new and the same model, to better understand real-world issues with the pumps and therefore their yield?
So when we were planning out this field testing exercise, obviously we had what would have been ideal for us. And even as we were recruiting the customers and even working with the companies to try and recruit respondents for this, we had specifications, and we wanted to have farmers who have owned the pump for less than a year. Ideal would have been about 6 months. But then again, this boils down to, are they willing to participate in this field testing? Can you get this your ideal sample or your ideal respondent in this particular geography that you're interested in? So yes, we did have that. We at least polled most of our respondents from at least owners of pumps at least less than a year. So that was our target.
Thanks, Mike. There's another question from George, and he asks, did all the pumps work 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.? Are there any specific times during the day when the farmers prefer to irrigate?
So yes, we did see that at least. So as I mentioned, there were pumps that were automatically turning on and off, and they had very little human interaction, or at least any influence in terms of what time do you pump and what time do you stop pumping. But for the battery enabled pump or the direct drive portable pump in Kenya, where you have to turn it on yourself, we did see that most people were pumping during like in the early morning. Again, like for the battery enabled pumps, once you have a full capacity, we did see some irrigating even at night, obviously, because there's less evapotranspiration, or at least there's less of evaporation from the sun. So yes, there was this kind of trend that we noted in terms of pumping hours.
Okay, we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions. Someone is asking, how much is the return on investment for solar water pumps? How do they stand against diesel coupled pumps?
Yeah, I think this question has been asked for pretty much all appliances, and my guess it's the same person. But in this particular field testing, we wanted to understand the performance of these appliances in the field, and we did collect like how much money these users were making, at least for those who are using their pumps for income generation. We did not compare like diesel versus solar, but I'm sure there are studies that have been done, I know, one by the International Food Policy Research Institute. But in this particular field testing exercise, we did not try to evaluate that kind of return on investment.
Okay. The installation of the pump was tested. Did they have storage tanks? Did they use drip irrigation channels? What were the general investment cost and the payback period?
Yeah, also, I think part of this question is related to what I just mentioned. But in terms of the storage tanks, yes, we did see people using storage tanks. In Senegal, they were using open reservoirs for those who are storing their water. But in Kenya and Tanzania, they were mostly using overhead tanks.
All right, a final question. Michael Kant is asking, just to confirm, did you see direct drive pumps working at 6 a.m. before the sun is even up? That would lead me to believe there is something off in the data.
On the direct drive pumps, the average start time actually from the data that we have was 6 a.m. In Senegal, we did see some of these pumps starting to pump at 6 a.m., 6:30, and this actually is very well documented in the report. You can be able to see for each of the pump model in the 3 countries, you can see the average start time. So please have a look at that in the report. Yeah.
Mike, thank you so much for your presentation and for answering the questions. At this point, I know we still have a few more questions, but we're running out of time. I'd like to hand over to Martha, who's going to do the conclusion, and we can wrap up the webinar.
Yeah,
Thanks,
sorry, sorry, one last comment. I'd like to mention that apologies for the mix-up. I think for the fridges, yes, we did have one with phase change material in Rwanda. So just to clarify that, yes, we did have some of the batteries, some of the fridges with phase change material in Rwanda. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Lisa. And thank you all very much for your questions and engagement. It's really encouraging to see the participation that we've had in this webinar and the interest essentially in field testing. I guess it goes to show the importance of the insights for multiple stakeholders in this sector. So we've noted some of the outstanding questions and we'll aim to provide clarity on them. So there's been questions around affordability, payback periods, and return on investment on the technologies. There's been questions on the panel design and battery sizing for the multiple appliances, and that's included in the report, but we'll send that back also as feedback in the email that we send after this. And there's been questions on the clarification on the refrigerator technology that came up quite a lot on whether they used PCM/ICE batteries, or if none of the above, what were they actually using? And so we'll share the responses to these as we send out the webinar materials later, and we'll include the links as well to all the field testing resources listed on your screen for your reference as we send those out. In terms of leveraging the learnings from this study and next step, our next step will really be to enhance the field testing guides that we shared earlier on in this presentation that were previously developed. And the idea is to really enhance the guidance, especially on the monitoring and synthesis phases of field testing, to further embed quality control in the process and early warning systems to allow for pivoting if an initially planned data collection mechanism fails. And then lastly, and this was also raised by a member of the audience today, we plan to do more field testing because the more we field test appliances in diverse geographies across multiple use cases, then the more we enhance our collective understanding of their performance. So thank you all very much for your participation. I'll hand over back to Lisa to close us out.